4.2 marks bought a dollar in 1914. 9 years later, 4.2 trillion. At the desk with us is Professor Rahman, who studies how states pay for wars they have already lost, which is the whole of this story. And there's a second number tonight, one a German field marshal put his name to, and it isn't true. Keep that one warm because it's the one that did the real damage.
Caroline here. Same country, same dollar, 9 years. People got paid and ran, not walked. Ran to spend it before lunch.
Hey everyone, I'm Leo, and the middle of that curve is the part nobody shows you. January 1920, 64.8 marks to the dollar. That already felt like the end of the world to the people living in it. It was not even the beginning.
There is a mistake people make with that curve, and it's the whole subject. They read it as an accident. Nothing on it was an accident. Every step was a decision somebody made, wrote down, and signed.
Which is why we start before the money, because the money died second. Something else got there first, and it was a story about who lost the war. Here's what makes that story worth an episode. It was false, it was official, and the men who put it into the record were the same men who ordered the surrender.
That is a big claim.
It is. Every piece of it has a date and a source, and we'll name both as we go.
What you are looking at is a bank counter, not a warehouse. That is one day's cash.
The chat's pushed up the one I was going to sit on. How does a country's money go from 4.2 to 4.2 trillion?
It goes there in steps, and the first step isn't financial at all. Leo has the year it starts in, and it starts in a kitchen. Stick with us, because the number that ate this country wasn't the first thing that broke. Before we keep going, one small favor that actually moves the needle. If this is landing for you, tap like, then subscribe and turn on the bell so you do not miss the rest. 2 taps, completely free, and it pushes this in front of more people who need it.
"1917, and the potatoes failed." That is where this starts, and it is a kitchen, not a battlefield. The blockade our U-boat episode covered at sea never had to touch a German soldier to win. It worked on the shopping. Germans called that winter the Turnip Winter because when the potato crop went, the Swede turnip was what was left, and it's neither nutritious nor palatable. The encyclopedia's phrasing, not mine.
Turnips for a winter, 2 pounds a week, on a card, a real card. From Erfurt. Read it again slower and it gives you the whole year. 25th week of the ration, 26th, 27th. Somebody printed a form for a famine and numbered the weeks.
By 1918, imports were down to 1/5 of pre-war volume. 1/5, a country built on trade, living on whatever it could grow inside its own.
Leo, stop there. 1/5 of what exactly?
Volume, tonnage coming in. By value, it was under 39%, which sounds better and is worse, because prices had gone up. That gap is where people get fooled.
And now the number everyone wants, which is how many people it killed. Slow down with me here, because there is no single answer, and the fight over the answer is itself a piece of history. In December 1918, the Reich Health Office published a study claiming 762,796 civilian excess deaths from the blockade. Now look at the title of that study. Damage to German public health by the enemy trade blockade, contrary to international law. That's not a coroner's report. That is a legal brief, published 1 month after the armistice, by a government that needed a number.
So the official figure is evidence in a case. Whose case?
Germany's, at the peace conference. Which doesn't make it a lie, it makes it interested. Modern scholarship puts the range at 478,500 to 800,000 dead from hunger-related disease, and says plainly it cannot be ascribed exclusively to the blockade. German food policy failed too.
And there are lower counts too, from studies done in the 20s. Those are the ones people reach for when they want the number small.
Both things are true, and this is where the record actually leaves us. Somewhere between 400,000 and 800,000 German civilians died of hunger-related disease. The exact figure is genuinely contested, and the very first version of it was published as an argument. Anyone who hands you one clean number is selling you something. A country that hungry does not lose its war quietly. Leo, take us to August. Professor Rahman, you have been through the September paperwork more closely than any of us. What did the German High Command actually ask for, and who did they ask?
They asked the civilian politicians in Berlin to obtain an armistice, immediately. And in the same breath, they put the full blame for the defeat on those same politicians. That's not my reading of it. That is the sequence in the scholarly record of the myth itself.
Say the order out loud, because the order is the argument.
March 21st, 1918, 74 divisions, 50-mile front, and the British go back 40 miles in days. It looked like a war being won. By June it had cost 600,000 irreplaceable assault troops, and no reserves were left to push through the hole they had made. You can't spend your best men twice.
So the offensive worked and lost the war?
It did both. That is common in the last year of a long war. You take ground you can't hold, with an army you can't replace.
Then the 8th of August, Amiens. 6 miles on the first day, and here is the sentence that matters. Many of Ludendorff's troops surrendered after offering little more than token resistance. His own word for that day, in his own memoirs, was black. The black day of the German army in the history of this war?
He wrote that himself.
He wrote that himself. Across the 100 days that followed, roughly 760,000 German casualties, and the source is blunt about what dwarfed even that. Desertion, mutiny, and unrest undermining the cohesion and solidity of the army.
On the 30th of September, Bulgaria signs out at Salonika and the whole Balkan front dissolves. The southern door is just open.
Which is when the demand goes to Berlin, late September, not after a revolution, before one.
Draw it, because this is the whole episode in one picture. Top bar, the army's demand, in the last days of September. On the 3rd of October, Ludendorff says publicly that the war is lost and the government must seek an armistice at once. Berlin's first note goes to Washington that same week.
And the sailors don't move until the end of October. That's 5 weeks of daylight between them. 5 weeks.
5 weeks with nothing mutinied, nothing proclaimed, nothing signed. The men who ran the war knew. They handed the bill to the men who had not run it.
It's the check on the table. You order the whole meal, you get up, and you leave whoever arrived at dessert to pay it.
Keep that image close, because in 2 scenes somebody is murdered for picking that check up. Caroline, take us to Kiel.
9 dead in a street in Kiel. That is the price of admission to everything that follows. Kiel is a naval town on the Baltic. End of October 1918. The Fleet Command has a plan. One last sortie against the Royal Navy.
With the armistice already being negotiated, what's the objective even? What does winning look like in that operation?
Honor. That's it. That's the objective.
And the men said no, and the record is unromantic about why. The sailors who led that mutiny were motivated by the desire to save themselves rather than risk their lives in a battle they believed would have no impact on the war's final outcome. Not ideology, arithmetic. The war was ending, the order was pointless, and they wanted to be alive at the end of it. On the night of the 29th to the 30th of October, the Naval Command, panicked by its own crews, canceled the operation. Canceling it didn't end it. On the 3rd of November, several thousand sailors and civilians marched. Soldiers opened fire, and at least 9 protesters were killed.
2 days later, the red flag is over the fleet. The day after that, Hamburg.
That's fast. 9 days from a shooting in a port town to the whole country.
Explain it to me like I have never read a page on this, because I genuinely want to know what broke. An empire doesn't fall in 9 days because 9 people died?
It falls in 9 days when it's been hollow for 2 years. The shooting is just the day somebody checks. The sailors proved orders no longer traveled downward. After that, every garrison town runs the same test.
That is better than the version I had in my head. Thank you.
Then Berlin, and Berlin is farce. 9th of November, Max von Baden announces the Kaiser has abdicated. The Kaiser has not agreed to. As the Emperor hesitated, he published it anyway, no authorization. Then he handed the chancellorship to Ebert in what the record calls, flatly, an unconstitutional act.
And then the afternoon. 2 o'clock, Philipp Scheidemann leans out of a window of the Reichstag and proclaims the German Republic, specifically to get there before the Spartacists did. 4 o'clock, 2 miles away, Karl Liebknecht proclaims a free socialist republic from a balcony of the palace. German democracy is born twice in one afternoon, by two men racing each other, and neither of them had the authority to do it.
The man it was all about was already in a car. Wilhelm II crossed into the Netherlands 18 days before he ever formally abdicated.
Left first, signed later. That's the whole style of this month.
The name on the armistice is Matthias Erzberger, and he was not a soldier. He was a Catholic politician from the Centre Party who had joined the first parliamentary government of Imperial Germany 1 month earlier. Before dawn on the 11th of November 1918, in a railway carriage in a forest at Compiègne, he signed on behalf of the German Supreme Command and the new revolutionary government, both, at once.
So the Supreme Command is a signature on that paper. They're just not in the room.
They're not in the room.
Here's how I'd put it to somebody who has never touched this period. A table of people who ordered an enormous meal. The ones who chose every dish get up and leave. The check is the armistice. The waiter is history. And the person still sitting there is Erzberger, who arrived late and ordered nothing.
Push on that though, because analogies flatter. What is the check worth when nobody at that table could have paid it anyway? The war was lost. Someone had to sign something.
That's fair, and it's exactly where it breaks. Unlike a restaurant, this bill was getting paid no matter who sat there. So it doesn't tell you the war could have ended differently. It tells you who got the receipt with their name on it. An armistice is a document. It has a signature line, and that line went to a civilian.
And here's the part that gets skipped. The armistice didn't feed anybody.
It didn't. This is the piece even careful accounts drop. The blockade of Germany did not end with the armistice. The Allies maintained it to ensure Germany was in no position to resume warfare. So the shooting stops on the 11th of November, the crowds in Paris are dancing in the street, and in Germany the food doesn't come.
Months of it. Into 1919.
Months of it, easing only the following spring. Which answers a question I get constantly, which is why Germans experience the peace as a continuation of the war. For the person queuing for food, it was, materially it was. The guns stopped and nothing on their plate changed.
And this is where I cash the thing I said I'd come back to, about who picks up the check.
The check on the table gets you killed. 26th of August, 1921. A right-wing terrorist group called Consul murdered him 2.5 years after he signed.
For ending a war he didn't lose.
For ending a war he didn't lose? That's it exactly.
Remember his name. In 2 scenes we watch a story get built that needed exactly this. A civilian with a signature, and a public willing to believe he wanted to put it there. Professor Rahman, the treaty is next, and one clause in it has our name on it. Professor Rahman was making the point before we came back that the Treaty of Versailles is really 2 documents. The one people argue about, and the one people had to live inside.
The famous one is about guilt and reparations. The other is a list of places. For anyone standing in those places, that was the only part that mattered.
So the treaty in one breath, then we stop somewhere specific. Alsace and Lorraine back to France. The colonies renounced. The army capped at 100,000 men. The great general staff dissolved and forbidden to reform. No submarines, no air force. We told that story properly elsewhere.
Now the clause nobody covers.
This valley, the Saar. Coal country on the French border, and this series has been walking past it since we were counting princes. Right on the line with the French border along the bottom of the frame. Article 45, and I want the treaty's own words here, not a summary. As compensation for the destruction of the coal mines in the north of France, Germany cedes to France, in full and absolute possession with exclusive rights of exploitation, the coal mines situated in the Saar Basin.
In full and absolute possession, not leased, owned.
And the reason given is a real one, which people forget. Retreating armies flooded and wrecked the French pits. That damage existed. This isn't a clause somebody invented out of spite.
Leo, stop right there. That's my lane. Real reason. It's also a permanent transfer of the most valuable thing under 100,000 people's feet to a foreign state, with no vote. Then Article 49 takes the territory. Germany hands the governing of it to the League as trustee, 15 years. Then the inhabitants choose their sovereignty.
Which is a strange thing to be. Not German, not French, not independent. Governed by a commission representing the League, working mines owned by another country. The first territory the League ever administered.
The treaty went right down to the coins in a pocket. The annex forbids any restriction on the circulation of French money there, and lets the French state pay for the mines in francs.
Which line, though? There are several paragraphs in that annex, and I want to be exact about what it does and does not say.
Paragraph 32, I believe. Check the number. The clause is not in doubt. It legalizes French money. It does not abolish the mark. Anyone who says the franc became the Tsar's only currency has gone past the document.
Good. That distinction matters at the end tonight, and here is why, as a question. 15 years later, that valley got its ballot. Before I tell you the result, over or under 70% for going back to Germany, commit.
Under. 15 years is a long time to get used to something, and they had jobs.
The trend says under 2. Comfort wins ballots.
Sit with those guesses. We pay it at the very end tonight, and neither of you is close. Caroline, the lie is next, and it needs a room and a date.
A lie this big leaves a paper trail. This one leaves 4 pieces of paper, in order. Follow them forward, and you watch a story get manufactured, promoted, made official, then weaponized. 14 months. Every link dated.
Piece 1 is the September we already drew. The war's own commander concludes it is lost, demands the politicians obtain an armistice, and in the same act assigns them the blame. Here's what that gives you, an explanation loaded before the defeat is even public.
Piece 2 is a newspaper, and the misquote was deliberate. 17th of December 1918. A Swiss paper, the Neue Zürcher Zeitung, runs a report that misquotes the British General Frederick Maurice. The quote it produces, "The German army was stabbed in the back."
Maurice denied saying it. He kept denying it. It didn't matter, because by then the phrase had what it needed, which was a foreign uniform attached to it.
An enemy general saying it makes it evidence. A German general saying it makes it an excuse.
Piece 3 turns a rumor into a record. 18th of November 1919. Field Marshal Paul von Hindenburg appears before Parliament's Committee of Inquiry into the causes of the German defeat. He doesn't answer questions. He reads a prepared declaration, and in it, an English general said with justice, "The German army was stabbed in the back." He accuses the socialists of having sabotaged the war from the very beginning until defeat became inevitable.
Read that again slower. It's a Swiss newspaper's mistake, quoted back at a parliamentary inquiry as testimony by the most respected soldier in the country.
And here is the detail that closes the circle. That declaration was formulated with Karl Helfferich and with Erich Ludendorff. The man who demanded the armistice in September 1918 helped write the document that blamed other people for it in November 1919. It's the same hand at both ends of the chain.
He signed the order and the alibi.
Piece 4, and it's the ugliest. It didn't wait for the Nazis. In 1918, the Pan-German League decided to spearhead radical anti-Semitism and to put the whole blame for defeat on the Jews.
And that deserves a plain sentence, not a delicate one. German Jews had served and died in that army alongside everyone else. Blaming them was a slander with no factual content whatsoever, chosen deliberately by an organized political group, 15 years before the party most people associate it with took power. It's not a side of an argument. It's a lie somebody selected because it was useful.
It was believable for a reason worth naming. Through the war, the leadership had kept the truth about the collapsing military situation from the population. People were fed victory news until November. If you are told you are winning and then told you have lost, betrayal is the only story that fits.
So now we kill it using its own army's paperwork. Amiens. troops surrendering after little more than token resistance, and the commander who later blamed civilians, calling that day black in his own memoir. The 100 Days, roughly 760,000 casualties, with desertion and mutiny undermining the army's cohesion. And then the timing, which ends the argument.
The armistice was demanded in late September. The first sailor refused an order at the end of October. You can't be stabbed in the back by something that hasn't happened yet.
Most historians today agree these legends destabilized Weimar democracy to a very high degree and contributed to the rise of National Socialism. Not our verdict. The fields. The next 10 minutes are the bill.
(354-22). That's the scoreline of political killing in the early republic. It comes from a mathematician, Emil Julius Gumbel, who in 1922 did what nobody else bothered to. He counted 354 killings by right-wing factions, 22 by the left.
Then he counted the sentences, which is the part that matters. 326 of the 354 went unpunished. I always want the itemized version. Gumbel produced one, a ledger, case by case, not a statistic. A list of times a court decided a killing on one side wasn't really a crime.
Which is the atmosphere the rest of this scene happens in. March 1920. The government tries to demobilize 2 Free Corps brigades. One takes Berlin instead. Wolfgang Kapp forms a government, with Ludendorff in it again, and the Republican government runs to southern Germany.
And the army puts it down?
No. Within 4 days, a general strike by the labor unions and the refusal of civil servants to follow Kapp's orders led to the coup's collapse. Not soldiers. Tram drivers, typists, and clerks.
So democracy's immune system worked?
Once, properly. And it is worth saying out loud that this republic wasn't doomed by physics. Ordinary people stopped a coup in 96 hours. Then Erzberger in 21. Then the 24th of June 1922, Walther Rathenau, the sitting foreign minister, shot by right-wing terrorists near his home in Berlin.
That's a serving cabinet minister. So what's the response from the state? Was there one?
Read the ledger. 326 unpunished. That's the response.
And now the money, which is where the warm number has been sitting all episode. 11th of January 1923. Over a reparations default, French and Belgian troops occupy the Ruhr, which is Germany's industrial heartland. Essen, Duisburg, Dortmund. Coal and steel for the whole country under foreign occupation. Germany's answer is passive resistance. The workers stop working, and the government keeps paying them, and the mines and factories producing nothing for 8 months.
So they lose the tax revenue and take on the wage bill at the same time.
Both ends at once. The source is blunt for a reference work. Plunging tax receipts, plus the cost of underwriting factories producing nothing, destroyed Germany's public finances and currency. Destroyed, not strained.
So the money came from where exactly? You can't tax an occupied region that isn't working.
From the printing press, and it lands on a loaf of bread. Watch what one loaf did in 11 months.
January 1923, roughly 250 marks for a loaf, and that already felt expensive to the person buying it.
By November of the same year, roughly 200 billion marks. Same loaf, same bakery, 11 months. And I want to flag honestly that month-by-month prices differ between sources, so take those as the shape of the curve, not a till receipt.
So the savers just lose out.
Nearly right, and the correction matters. They didn't lose out. They were erased, in a way that felt like a moral event. A pension built over 40 years of work didn't shrink. It stopped existing, while the person holding it had done nothing wrong. And there's the second number I asked you to keep warm. Not 4.2 trillion. 11 months, for one loaf of bread to go from 250 marks to 200 billion. And that's the small version. The exchange rate did something considerably worse, and Caroline is about to make me prove it. Professor Rahman has already handed you 2 of the 3 causes here, and he is not done. Before the number, the mechanism, because the number is meaningless without it.
Step 1 happened in 1914 and nobody noticed. Rather than tax the war, the government borrowed for it, increasingly from the Reichsbank, which printed the notes. That is the German central bank's own account of itself.
So Germany went to war on credit and planned to pay it off by winning?
Precisely. The plan for the debt was somebody else's territory. Lose, and the debt stays while the plan goes.
So what is step 2?
Reparations owed in gold and foreign currency, which your own press cannot make. Then the Ruhr, where you print anyway, to pay people not to work.
Once people expect it to keep falling, they spend faster, which makes it fall faster.
So here's the figure this episode has been walking toward. In January 1920, 64.8 marks bought $1 American. By November 1923, $1 American cost 4.2 trillion marks. 9 years earlier, that dollar cost 4.2 marks. Same currency, same name.
I know this cold, but you're about to repeat it to somebody. Don't take my word for it. Pull the page up. There it is. Word for word. 64.8 marks to the dollar in January 1920, 4.2 trillion in November 1923. That is the sentence.
Now the trap, because if you go looking at the actual notes, you will get this wrong inside a minute. A real Reichsbank note, dated Berlin, the 15th of September 1923. It reads 10 Milliarden Mark. In German, a milliardi is 1,000 million, which English calls a billion. So that's a 10 billion mark note.
Wait, so what's a German billion?
A German billion is a million, which English calls a trillion. Which is why this specimen note, reading 100 billion mark, is not 100 billion. It's 100 trillion marks, and half the careless writing about this period gets it backwards.
One word, 3 orders of magnitude.
And then, extraordinarily, it stops. On the 15th of November 1923, Germany issues the Rentenmark. 1 trillion old paper marks becomes 1 new Rentenmark. On the 20th, the rate against the dollar is stabilized, and it stays stabilized.
And people start spending like people again.
That fast? Why does the new one work when the old one didn't?
Because what broke was belief. The new note came with a hard limit on how many could exist. Money is a promise. They stopped making one they were visibly breaking.
Here is the fact I most want you to leave with, because it cuts against the story everyone thinks they know. In the same week the money died, somebody tried to take the country by force, and the country said no. 8th and 9th of November 1923, Munich. A coalition led by the Nazi Party marches on the Feldherrnhalle. There is a shootout. 14 Nazis and 4 police officers are killed. The putsch fails.
In the worst month the Republic ever had, the coup lost.
In the worst month it ever had. Which is why the sentence is the scandal. Convicted of high treason, and the judges hand down the lightest sentence the law allows. 5 years, minimum security, parole possible. Out in December 1924. Roughly 9 months served for an armed attempt on the state.
And note the shape of that against Gumbel's ledger. 326 unpunished killings on one side. This isn't an eccentric verdict. It's the same court system behaving consistently.
Professor Rahman, thank you. Money is a promise is the line I'm taking out of this.
Seconded. You made the mechanism make sense, which nobody ever does.
Glad to help. Watch the courts, not the currency. The currency recovered.
So Germany fixes its money, refuses a coup, and gets 6 good years. Which leaves one question standing. What went wrong after everything went right? Everything went right, and then one man's heart stopped. That's genuinely part of the answer.
The good years were real, though. People skip that.
1924, the Dawes Plan. Reparations restructured, an 800 million mark loan, a rebuilt Reichsbank.
Locarno in 25, the League of Nations in 26, a Nobel Peace Prize for Gustav Stresemann the same year.
6 years of ordinary, which is what people actually want.
Then the 3rd of October 1929, Stresemann dies. He was 51.
The New York crash lands within weeks.
By early 1932, more than 6 million Germans out of work.
And that's when the democracy stops, isn't it? When he arrives.
2 ways to answer that, and the first is that the question has the year wrong. The democracy stops in July 1930, and he is nowhere near it. Chancellor Brüning cannot pass a budget, so he governs by emergency decree under Article 48, which lets the president suspend civil liberties to restore order. From that point, the Reichstag is scenery.
So rule by decree is normal before he's anywhere near power?
Normal, routine, and used by people trying to save the Republic. That's the lesson, and it isn't a comfortable one.
But the vote was climbing. That's the part everyone knows.
It climbed, then it fell, and it fell before the appointment. Look at it.
Okay, down 4 points, and that's when the deal gets cut.
33 in November. Falling. 30th of January 1933. Hindenburg appoints him chancellor as the result of a political deal arranged by conservative politicians who wanted the party's popularity for their own purposes.
They thought they could control him.
They mistakenly believed that they could control Hitler. The museum's words, not ours. He wasn't directly elected. He didn't seize power in a coup. He was handed it, legally, by men who thought they were being clever.
The safeguards didn't fail. Somebody opened them.
And there the stage is set. On 4 threads this arc followed. The myth, a lie about 1918 that respectable men made official. The money, a trauma that made never again worth any promise. The nationalism that fed on both. And the borderland, still under a foreign flag, still waiting on a ballot, which we owe you, because this series started in that valley. 13th of January 1935, and the Tsar finally votes.
3 boxes, exactly as the treaty wrote them 16 years earlier.
90.73% for Germany, 8.86% for the status quo, 0.4% for France. Turnout, 97.86%.
We both said under 70. We were not close.
I hate it. It's correct, and I hate it.
And that vote is where this series' Valley story ends. One borderland, 15 years under a commission, choosing.
4 episodes to get from 300 princes to that ballot paper.
Carry one thing out of here. A democracy is rarely taken. It's signed away in daylight by people who believe they are being sensible.
In daylight, that's the part.
If this arc was worth 4 episodes to you, subscribe, because the dates are the whole defense against the story. Here's the one we could not settle. In 1920, a general strike stopped a coup in 4 days. Why not in 1932? 4 episodes ago, this arc opened on a map nobody could read. It ends on a ballot paper and a handful of dates that hold. Keep the dates. This is Professor Erica, and that closes the road to the First World War.